When people hear Tatra, they usually think of massive, rugged trucks. That was true in the past, and it still is today. But this brand had another life, in the world of passenger cars. Not ordinary ones, not mass-produced, but those built for officials and the elite. And among them, the Tatra T613 stood apart, a car meant to embody the technical strength of the Socialist Bloc. But it became its final attempt to catch up with the West. Even before the start of World War II, Tatra was trying to make a name for itself in the premium car segment. Though back then, nobody really used that word. By that time, the global auto industry had already settled on a common formula: the engine up front, rear-wheel drive, and increasingly standardized body shapes. But Tatra chose a different path. In 1934, the Czech company introduced the T77, a car with a rear-mounted, air-cooled V8 engine and an impressively spacious cabin for its era. Both in design and appearance, it shared some similarities with the early Volkswagen Beetle, which was just being developed. Yet for a luxury car, it was a bold and unconventional move. The Czechs were confident in their vision. They kept producing rear-engine cars right up until the start of the war, and returned to the same concept as soon as it ended. Production of the T87, originally designed in 1937 by Hans Ledwinka, resumed in 1946. It was presented as Tatra's flagship, an aerodynamic limousine of the future. Of course, in post-war Eastern Europe, only a handful of people could afford such a car. In response, the company decided to build something more accessible, a true people's Tatra. That idea led to the creation of the T600 Tatra plan in 1948. Instead of a large V8, it used a compact four-cylinder engine. The interior was simplified, and the overall design looked like a lighter, more modest version of the T87. In the reality of post-war Europe, that was actually a compliment. Cities were still in ruins, and ostentatious luxury cars would have felt out of place. A total of 6,343 Tatra plans were produced, including a single convertible. Life in Europe was gradually getting back on track. Cities were being rebuilt, people were recovering from the horrors of war, and the automotive industry was coming back to life. The Czechs made a logical decision. It was time to create a new flagship, a limousine of the future. The first prototypes appeared in 1955, and to their credit, Tatra engineers stubbornly followed their own path, ignoring trends and conventions. The Tatra T603 looks futuristic even by today's standards. And in the mid-1950s, it must have seemed like something straight out of science fiction. The rear engine layout remained, and the V8 made its return, replacing the smaller four-cylinder unit. Yet before this prototype appeared, there was an unpleasant, though very typical, story for the Socialist Bloc. 2 years earlier, at a meeting of the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, Tatra was officially ordered to focus solely on trucks. Luxury cars for Czechoslovakia, according to the plan, were to be supplied by the Soviet Union. But the Czechoslovak political elite quickly realized that the Soviet limousines didn't quite meet the level of quality expected for the country's highest officials. The GAZ-12, which was supposed to serve that role, looked and felt more like a senior staff car for mid-level bureaucrats than a proper executive limousine. That alone might have been tolerable, but the constant delays in deliveries were not. As a result, Czechoslovak officials gave Tatra the green light to develop their own luxury car. That's how the legendary T603 came to be. By the way, I already have a separate video about it, one of my earliest, and I'll leave a link to it in the pinned comment. Time went on, and car design trends began to change. For all its futuristic looks, by the late 1960s, the Tatra T603 was hopelessly outdated. The world was moving away from smooth, rounded shapes towards sharp, straight lines, with large panoramic windows and thin roof pillars. During the 1960s, Tatra engineers made several attempts to design a successor, but at some point, they seemed to realize they couldn't manage it on their own. In 1967, the Italian design studio Carrozzeria Alfredo Vignali joined the project. By then, the overall layout had already been developed by the Czech team. The main difference of what would become the T613 was the engine placement. Now it sat above the rear axle, not behind it. This made the layout something between a rear engine and a mid-engine design, giving the car almost perfect weight distribution. And that was important, because weight balance had always been a weak spot for rear-engine cars, often making them harder to handle. The T613 had a 55 to 45 weight distribution in favor of the rear axle, almost perfectly balanced, as mentioned earlier. Thanks to that, the engineers managed to achieve handling that, if not perfect, was at least very respectable for its time. And credit where it's due. The Italian designers did an excellent job. The new Tatra T613 turned out distinctive, memorable, and at the same time, genuinely modern. It fit perfectly into the early 1970s aesthetic, a time when sharp, angular shapes were seen as symbols of progress. Its silhouette looked sleek and light, making the fairly large car appear anything but heavy. And despite the new design language, it still kept the family look, recognizable and unlike anything else on the road. With no engine in the front, the Italians were able to design a body with large crumple zones, a serious step toward passive safety. Add to that the car's solid weight, well-thought-out interior structure, and you get a vehicle that, by the standards of the Eastern Bloc, was a true technological flagship. The generous glass area not only gave the car a clean, airy look, but also provided excellent visibility. And the nearly rectangular rear doors made it easy for high-ranking passengers to step into the cabin of the new Tatra. By 1970, the new Tatra already existed as 3 prototypes, both sedan and coupe versions. There were a few coupes in other socialist countries too. I even made a video about one of them. But those were small, inexpensive cars. Imagining a high-ranking official cruising through the streets of Prague or Moscow in a premium 2-door coupe was simply unthinkable. So, the 2-door T613 never went into production. In the socialist reality, there just wasn't a social class it could be made for. The T613 was first shown to the public at the Prague Motor Show in 1973, and by 1975, small-scale production began at the factory branch in the town of Pribor. The main plant in Kopřivnice was already busy building trucks, so the limousines were assembled almost by hand. Only about 1,000 cars were made each year, which, for a luxury class vehicle, actually added to its prestige. Under the short rear hood sat a 3.5-liter V8 engine, 4 camshafts, twin carburetors, and contactless ignition. All of that sounded very impressive for the time. With 165 horsepower, the heavy T613 could reach 100 kilometers per hour in 11.5 seconds and hit a top speed of around 200 kilometers per hour. The sound was quite distinctive. The air-cooled engine produced a deep mechanical growl. Nothing like the smooth hum of Western luxury sedans. But that was part of Tatra's DNA. An air-cooled V8 was central to its identity. Fuel consumption reached up to 20 liters per 100 kilometers, though few owners cared. Most of these cars were fueled at the state's expense. Technically, private ownership was possible, but very few could afford it. Most T613 went to prominent scientists, artists, and cultural figures, usually as awards or honorary gifts. The majority, however, served in government fleets. The T613's technical level still looks impressive even today. It featured McPherson's strut front suspension, rack and pinion steering with power assist, and ventilated disc brakes on all 4 wheels, all far from standard even for many capitalist cars of the era. The equipment was just as remarkable: power windows, air conditioning, and 2 independent gasoline-fired heating systems. For the late 1970s, that was pure science fiction. Still, there was one major drawback. None of the T613 versions ever came with an automatic transmission. The manual gearbox, though durable and well-engineered, didn't quite fit the image of a dignified executive sedan. Even so, in terms of comfort, features, and engineering sophistication, the Tatra T613 clearly outclassed most of its socialist counterparts. The T613 was mainly exported to friendly socialist countries, with the Soviet Union being its largest importer. In the USSR, Tatras were used by various government agencies and filled an intermediate niche between the Volga and the Chaika. They were assigned to officials whose rank was too high for a Volga, but not high enough for a Chaika. The Czech import was well respected in the Soviet Union. While it didn't quite match the Chaika in prestige, it was nearly on par in terms of equipment, and in some aspects, even superior. A small batch of T613 was also supplied to the Moscow police, where they served alongside Volgas and Mercedeses, acting as something of a showcase for the Soviet law enforcement fleet. The first update, or as we'd say today, facelift, for the Tatra T613 came in 1980. This version received the index 613-2, and the main changes were under the hood. The engine became slightly more powerful and a bit more fuel efficient. Externally, the car remained almost identical. Even Tatra enthusiasts sometimes struggled to tell the two versions apart. That same year, a special edition appeared, easily recognizable by its rectangular headlights. This model was intended for high-ranking officials and was called the Tatra T613 Special. Its interior was trimmed in leather, equipped with air conditioning, a telephone, and a partition separating the driver from the passengers. These cars were delivered to government garages in Czechoslovakia, Cuba, and even North Korea. Interestingly, it was this version that introduced the first automatic transmission ever fitted to the 613, a 3-speed ZF unit from Germany. Only around 200 cars were built, meaning that this taste of socialist luxury was reserved for a very select few. The next update came in 1984, when the model received the 613-3 index. This time the changes extended to the exterior. The chrome bumpers were replaced with plastic ones. The headlights became asymmetrical in size, and the overall look of the car became more angular and restrained. The Tatra looked more modern, but also noticeably simpler. The minimalist design trends of the 1980s, even for executive cars, didn't exactly enhance the car's prestigious image. It was also around this time that the 613 gained one of its most unexpected claims to fame. You've probably seen the footage, the 1995 Hungarian Grand Prix, Japanese driver Taki Inoue, and the service vehicle based on the Tatra 613, known as the T623. This modified version had a more powerful engine, lighter components, and upgraded brakes, and it was used as a track support car at racing events. During one of the incidents, the Tatra ended up in the frame and accidentally became part of Formula One history, though not in the most heroic way. Luckily, no one was seriously hurt, and the event turned into a piece of racing folklore. According to Inoue, after the crash, he was asked to pay for medical services, but since he didn't have his credit card, being in full racing gear, he had to negotiate with the doctors before they treated him. In 1991, the Tatra underwent another update, gaining a more modern appearance. Even with the introduction of the Mi-Long version, featuring an extended wheelbase, leather interior, and an impressive list of options, production numbers remained very small, under 1,000 units. Almost all of them went into service with government institutions, as demand from private buyers had virtually disappeared. The final stage of the car's evolution came with the T613-5, developed after the breakup of Czechoslovakia. It featured a wealth of equipment, a talking onboard computer, CD changer, wood and leather trim, and numerous other refinements. Right-hand drive versions hinted at export ambitions, but reality turned out to be much less optimistic. The need for such a car simply no longer existed. The Czechs had had their fill of this model, while used German imports flooded the market. In the West, Tatra was seen as a relic of the past, bulky, thirsty, and unmistakably socialist. The Tatra 613 was a true product of its era. It could only exist in a planned economy, shielded from competition. And once it entered the world of the free market, it simply couldn't adapt. But don't rush to turn off the video, because despite what seemed like the final chapter, the story of the Tatra 613 didn't actually end there. The Czechs refused to give up and decided to try once more, this time to truly break into the elite. In 1996, they introduced the Tatra T700, which was, in essence, a deeply modernized version of the 613. The interior looked genuinely impressive. Leather upholstery, wood trim, climate control, and full power accessories. Everything you'd expect from a real luxury car. Only the manual transmission slightly spoiled the image of an executive limousine. But the world had already changed. German, Japanese, and American luxury cars operated on a completely different level, one that Tatra simply couldn't reach. The T700 looked interesting and even dignified, but ultimately, like an old-school Eastern European car trying to play in a new league. Only about 100 units were sold before the story of Tatra's passenger cars came to an end for good. Since then, the company has focused solely on trucks, reliable, powerful, but without the same romantic spirit that once defined the brand. Ironically, the T700, which failed to find success in its own time, has now become a true collector's gem. These cars are genuine rarities today, and many enthusiasts dream of owning one. Not long ago, a well-preserved T700 was sold for €80,000. Not bad at all for a mid-90s car. Overall, the story of Tatra's passenger cars is remarkable for its uniqueness and stubborn individuality. The Czechs stayed true to their own path, never chasing fashion or following trends. They remained themselves until the very end, and that's what makes Tatra stand out, not only within the Eastern Bloc, but in automotive history as a whole.